Hey everybody, this last weekend I spent a little time, very little time, in the snow and the mud, and had to wash the Jeep today, and thought I'd go over some of the ways that I keep my fenders nice and black, as well as some of the areas underneath the Jeep, how I keep those clean with very little effort. So I'm going to go over how I clean it without taking a lot of time and effort, and my secret weapon for keeping those fenders black. Now I'm going to go over and talk about a couple of different products. I am not going to put a link in the description below for you to click and go buy something like all the other YouTubers do. What I am going to do is put a link in the description below, and at the end of the video, probably right about here, you'll see a link, little box, which will take you to a playlist of more videos on YouTube to watch about cleaning the Jeep and turning the fenders black, so that, or getting them back to black. So that you don't take just my word for it, and you can learn a little bit more about how other people keep their fenders black and keep them clean. Okay, so first let's talk a little bit about the different types of problems that you'll have with the stock Wrangler fenders. They have a grain or a texture in them that really holds on to dirt, and when you've got any dirt or dust or mud in there, it makes them look gray, so that's when they're just dirty. Then the other issue that you'll have is that over time, they will tend to fade and actually turn gray. So there's one way that I treated them when they were gray from age versus how I treat them to keep them clean and to get all the mud and dirt out of that little grain, which makes them look dirty and gray. Now you may notice that the Notarubicon doesn't have the stock fenders anymore, but I do have the underneath fender liners, which are very similar to the material on the stock fenders. It's a little bit softer, but it's got that textured grain that really holds on to dirt and mud. And I've also got the mirrors, the back of the mirrors, and a few other areas that are still stock, and those areas turn gray and get muddy and are tough to keep clean also. So first, for the gray with age, or just the fading, there's a few ways that you can treat that. One way is to prevent it from happening in the first place. And this Aerospace 303 stuff is pretty good at that. You spray it on, you rub it in, it takes a little time, you got to follow the directions and let it dry, but it's got some UV protectant in it, and it's really good at preventing the fenders from turning gray and fading in the first place, and it helps bring them back to life a little if it's too late and if they've already turned gray. This stuff isn't cheap, and it takes a little time and effort to use, and be aware that even though it says on the label somewhere that it will not attract dust, they lie. I did a test a while back, went up onto Cleghorn on a dry, dusty day, and this stuff attracted the dust like a magnet. So just bear that in mind. Over time, as it dries out more, it attracts dust less, but they lie. Now, if your fenders are really gray and the Aerospace 303 doesn't take care of it, or you just don't want to spend the money, there's several products made specifically for black plastic and black fenders to bring them back to life and to get them shiny again. I use Mother's Back to Black. It works pretty well. It's pretty labor intensive. Again, you got to rub it in, you got to follow the directions. It works fairly well. And it does, I don't think this one has, well, it says it's got protectants in it also, but from what I've read, the Aerospace 303 protects better. So this does a good job at restoring the gray, getting it back to black. Now, if you have a newer Jeep, and not just fenders, like I said earlier, the back of the mirrors, any black part, you've probably noticed that when mud and dust gets in that grain, they tend to turn almost a brown. It's really hard to get them clean. So here's what I do, and I'll tell you my little secret weapon in a second. So first of all, you want to wash them just like you would, you got to wash your Jeep occasionally, although some people never do. I like to wash mine off after almost every run. You want to get in there with just I use regular car wash soap and a sponge to get up in there and get as much of the mud off of the plastic as you can, and try to rub in there and get as much out of the grain as you can. Sometimes I'll use a power washer, and that's really good at getting almost all of the mud out of that grain so that it doesn't show and doesn't make it look gray or brown anymore. Then after it's dry or mostly dry, I pull out my secret weapon, Armor All tire foam. They make this for tires. I used to use it on my tires on one of my other cars. I was using it on the Notarubicon once a while back and accidentally oversprayed a little bit off of the tire onto the fender liners behind the tire and some of the suspension parts. And I left it on there and came back a little while later, and that stuff was clean and shiny like I'd never seen it before. I couldn't believe it. So what I do now, every second or third time I wash the Jeep, I get the tire foam spray and spray it up underneath. When I had the stock fenders, I sprayed it on the fenders. Anywhere that it's black and it's got that texture that's hard to clean, I just spray it on. You let it dry for 5 or 10 minutes. It'll leave a little bit of a residue if you put on too much. So I'll get a rag and just wipe it, kind of buff it down a little, and that's it. I don't always have to wipe it off. Sometimes I just leave it and walk away, especially on the suspension parts, which is another great way to keep them clean. If you put on too much, it will leave an oily residue and it will attract dust and dirt. All you do is spray it on, wait, come back a few minutes later, and the stuff is clean. Another spot that gets really dirty and dusty and is hard to clean is the engine cover, the heat retention device inside under the hood. You can see here that I sprayed it off, let it sit, wiped it down, and it looks almost brand new. I also spray it on my springs, my differential, some of the axles, all the spots where people like to come and look at the Jeep, and that's usually behind the tires where you can see the suspension and the anti-rock and all the different parts that show. Spray those down, takes off all the mud. Maybe I'll give it a real quick wipe. Usually I don't, and everything is clean and shiny. So that's it. That's my secret weapon, Armor All tire foam. I've been using it for 2.5 years. Hasn't caused any problems on any of the metal or anything. If you know of any issues, leave a comment below and let me know. If you haven't tried it, give it a try. It's not very expensive. You get it at the auto parts store. Give it a try. Let me know how it works for you. Like I said earlier, there's going to be a link up here to check out some other videos of how people clean their Jeeps and keep the fenders black, so check some of those out. If you enjoyed this video, please click the thumbs up button. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below. Thanks. See you on the trail.